Hey, so this is the phosphorus cycle. So it's the third of the cycles we're looking at today. And we still have one more to do, the carbon cycle, on the next time we meet. But the phosphorus cycle. Now, the main thing that you need to know about the phosphorus cycle is it's the only one of the uh, uh, material cycles that happens in the ecosystem that has no atmospheric component. All right, this is purely a mineral component from start to finish. So basically, all living organisms need phosphorus, okay? Because phosphorus, if you remember, you have like the phosphorus is a key component of the backbone of DNA and RNA. It's also the P that's in ATP and ADP. So, it's phospholipids that make up all cell membranes. It's clearly a really, really important component of biological material. Like all cells need this stuff. And so, because of that, it's often a limiting factor that prevents uh, cells from growing. And so, the two main things that people need fertilizer for in order to get plants to grow is you need nitrogen and you need phosphorus. So, phosphorus, like nitrogen, is often a limiting nutrient that prevents plants growth. And without plants, you don't have animals and so on. All right. Now, where does phosphorus come from? Well, it doesn't come from the atmosphere. Like I said, it comes from rocks. So there are certain minerals that are found in the Earth's crust that have phosphorus as a component of them, usually in the form of phosphate ions. There's lots of them. Many, many different minerals have phosphate in them. Uh, and so when these get weathered and broken apart, some of this phosphorus dissolves and it gets into the water. So the surface water often has, and groundwater often has phosphate ions dissolved in it that came from rocks that were basically in the mountains or farther downhill. But basically, rock material dissolved and it released phosphate ions, and these phosphate ions then can be taken up by uh, plants through their roots. And then just like it happened with nitrogen, once that phosphorus is used to make cells in plants, then when animals eat the plants, they're able to access that phosphate and then use it to make their own cells. So here's a little diagram basically showing you have weathering rock. The weathered rock basically goes into the phosphates in the soil. The phosphates in the soil can be assimilated by a plant and then go into an animal. It's also worth noting that animal excrement can put those phosphates back into the soil. But notice there's never a component of it going into the air. At no point does this go into the air. Basically, the phosphorus stays either as rock, as dissolved in groundwater, or within living organisms, but nowhere else in the system. Now, some of it is going to make its way, well, all of it eventually is going to make its ways to rivers. But let's just look at the simple path. It dissolves, it gets into surface runoff, it's carried into a stream, it goes out to the ocean. And then what happens is basically uh, we have phosphate compounds forming in the ocean, and they build up at the bottom. There's phosphate mines. A lot of times it's in the bones of animals, but there's other ways it can end up. You can get different phosphate compounds that precipitate out of solution in the ocean, and they form layers. They're part of the layers of sediment at the bottom of the ocean that eventually, with time and pressure and tectonic movement, become rock. Right? So eventually these are going to become rock materials. Now, and we'll study plate tectonics later, and I realize maybe you guys haven't studied it yet. We'll definitely learn this year. It's fortunately not that hard. But the idea is the Earth's crust is in movement. And as the ocean crust is pushed underneath continental crust in a process called subduction, the top of it gets scraped off, kind of like scraping Oreos with your teeth. And I don't know, is that something they have here in Korea? You know what? I don't know if I've seen Oreos getting eaten here. Anyway, if you've been in the States, you know what I'm talking about. Now, what happens is as we scrape off the top of this, it gets pushed up, and so the phosphate that precipitated and became rocks here ends up pushed up here, and it becomes rock materials in the mountains, where it can then be weathered and turned back into phosphate in the groundwater again. So here's a diagram of it. So is this one an easy one? Man, come on, you can't get easier than this one. All right, weathering makes it go into the groundwater. It ends up being assimilated into plants, and then it goes into animals. and then those animals die and they excrete and it goes back into here. But eventually it's going to make its way to the water. And once it makes its way to the water, it's going to become part of ocean sediments. And then over many, many millions of years, it will get pushed back up and become part of the mountain. So in a sense, it's almost like a one-way path in the short term. It basically starts in the mountains and ends up in the sea. But in the long term, because of plate tectonics, it ends up becoming a cycle. But this is a very, very long, we're talking tens to hundreds of millions of years cycle, as opposed to nitrogen and water cycles, which can take place very quickly. All right, that's it, guys. We're done. Sorry there was three of them today, but we're done.